This is PediaCast CME.
Welcome to PediaCast CME, a pediatric podcast for providers. And now, direct from the campus of Nationwide Children's, here is your host, Dr. Mike.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to PediaCast CME. It is a pediatric podcast for healthcare providers. This is Dr. Mike coming to you from the campus of Nationwide Children's Hospital. We're in Columbus, Ohio. It's episode 91 for October 31st, 2023. We're calling this one Emotional Intelligence in Medicine, Self-Awareness. I want to welcome all of you to the program. So last year, we covered an important skill for medical professionals, one that increases success and satisfaction in all realms of healthcare, including clinical care, teaching, research, and service activities. And that skill is emotional intelligence, also known as EQ. Now, you may be wondering why EQ instead of EI. And some folks actually do use EI as an abbreviation for emotional intelligence. And I mean, that makes sense. But EQ is actually a play on words. As you know, IQ stands for intelligent quotient, which is a measure of a person's ability to reason. In contrast, emotional intelligence is a measure of a person's ability to find meaning in their own emotions, in the emotions of others, and the capacity to interpret those emotions and use them to inform thoughts, words, and actions. Now, both of these things, IQ and EQ, are very important to success. However, you've probably heard much more about IQ as opposed to EQ, and yet EQ has been shown to be more valid than IQ as an indicator of future success and satisfaction. Also, while IQ is static, so it doesn't really change over time, EQ is dynamic, meaning it can change. So EQ can be improved, which is great, and the reason we're talking about it today. But it can also degrade. So it is important we have awareness of EQ and actively work to improve it, which in turn results in greater success and a satisfaction in our medical career. Additionally, EQ has been shown to improve communication and teamwork, our ability to respond well under pressure, empathy, and quality of care. So EQ and the many ways it intersects with medicine is a very important consideration for every healthcare professional on the face of the planet. All right, with all of that in mind, I mentioned we talked about emotional intelligence last year, and that podcast was PediaCast CME 74, Introduction to EQ, Emotional Intelligence in Medicine. And in that episode, we explored the 4 pillars of EQ in a general sense. And just as a reminder, those are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. So today, we're going to take a deeper dive on pillar number 1, which forms the foundation of emotional intelligence. And that pillar is self-awareness. To help us with the topic, our guest from last time is joining us again, Miss Erica Banta. She is the Director of Digital Learning Solutions at The Ohio State University. Before we get to her, I just want to remind you, you can find PediaCast CME wherever podcasts are found. We always appreciate when you share your thoughts about the podcast, so please do leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And that way, others who come along looking for free continuing medical education credit will know what to expect. Speaking of that credit, it is easy to claim yours. Simply listen to the podcast, which you are about to do, and then head over to the show notes for this episode at PediaCastCME.org. You'll find a link to the post-test in the show notes. Just follow that link to Cloud CME, take and pass the post-test, and the Category 1 credit is yours. You do have to click the materials link once you land at that website. That's where you'll find the post-test. And we do offer credit to many pediatric professionals, including doctors, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, nurses, pharmacists, psychologists, and social workers, also dentists. And since Nationwide Children's is jointly accredited by all of those professional organizations, it's likely we offer the exact credits you need to fulfill your state's continuing medical education requirements. Complete details are available at PediaCastCME.org. And then finally, I want to remind you the information presented in this podcast is for general educational purposes only. Your use of this audio program is subject to our terms of use agreement, which you you can find at PediaCastCME.org. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll get Erica Banta settled into the studio, and then we will be back to talk about self-awareness and medicine. It's coming up right after this. Erica Banta is Director of Digital Learning Solutions at The Ohio State University. She holds an MBA from Franklin University and is a certified leadership development and succession strategist, which means she is an expert in helping leaders achieve their full potential as they drive the success of an organization. She's also a leadership practices inventory coach and a Berkman certified professional, which means she's qualified to coach leaders through performance assessments and challenge them to create sustainable strategies aimed at increasing leadership acumen. A critical skill, by the way, for leaders, one that often leads to success, is emotional intelligence, also known as EQ. And this is not only important in the business world, EQ also leads to success and satisfaction in all realms of medicine, including clinical care, teaching, research, and service activities. Ms. Banta joined us last year with an introduction to emotional intelligence. We're going to expand on that foundation today by taking a deeper look at one of the 4 pillars of emotional intelligence, which is self-awareness. Before we jump into that conversation, let's give a warm returning welcome to Ms. Erica Banta. Thank you so much for stopping by today.
Well, thanks for having me again. One of my favorite topics. I am happy to be here with you.
Great. Really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. And I think a great place to start is really just, again, defining what emotional intelligence is.
It's a great place to start. And very simply put, it's just your ability to recognize and understand emotions and your skill at using this awareness to manage yourself, but also your relationship with others. So you're recognizing and interpreting feelings and emotions in yourself, recognizing and interpreting feelings and emotions in others. So when you do those things, you're given all of these data points, then you use those to inform your relationships, your words, your behaviors, and your actions.
Yeah. And really, it does start with self-awareness because, as you said, it's first recognizing our emotions. And then once we've recognized our emotions, we can better know how to act upon how we're feeling, which then that would be moving from self-awareness to self-management.
That's right.
Yeah.
So when we think of the 4 quadrants of EQ, the 2 that have to do with self are self-awareness and self-management.
Yes.
So what do I see and what do I do? And those things can correlate, and sometimes they can be very different depending on your awareness of what you're feeling at any given time.
Yeah. And a lot of times what we're feeling may not be what would first come to mind. There may be other things in the background that influence how we're feeling, and then that in turn can influence how we manage ourselves. And so it's important to understand sort of where those feelings are coming from so we don't necessarily mismanage our feelings.
Absolutely. And without having the awareness of your baseline and what it takes to create intense emotions and feelings in you, and without some of that introspection and analysis, our emotions can just run off the rails. And we can behave in situations that would otherwise not be escalated in a manner of which people around you think, goodness sakes, what's going on with that person right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned in the introduction that we call emotional intelligence EQ in order for it to kind of line up with IQ. And IQ really measures our ability to solve problems, use logic, grasp or communicate complex ideas. And we're all kind of born with an IQ, which we can not necessarily increase, but we can figure out strategies to think about things and reason maybe a little bit better. But EQ, in contrast, is really very dynamic. I mean, you can really increase your EQ if you work at it. And if you decide not to work at it, you can also have your EQ degrade over time. So just speak a little bit. Have you seen that in the business world in terms of where leaders have increased their EQ and decreased their EQ?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I like to call it the performance puzzle. We might have talked a little bit about this the last time we spoke about EQ. There's really three main pieces to performance in the workplace, and that really transcends industry, in my opinion, whether it's in a business environment or manufacturing or education or in medicine, whether it's the teaching, the education, the clinical practice. So when I think about that performance puzzle, it's three pieces. It's IQ, personality, and EQ. And of those three sort of pieces, EQ is the one that's the most malleable. It can increase with practice and intent. Whereas our personality remains relatively stable over our adult lifetime, and IQ, the innate ability to learn, sort of remains stable as well. But our EQ with practice can actually increase, and we can get better and actually create new neural pathways of dealing with emotions when we feel them.
Yeah, so important. Once again, the four pillars of EQ are self-awareness, self-management, which we just mentioned, and then the other two are social awareness. So once we kind of have mastered being aware of our own emotions, then we can really start practicing, well, what emotions are other people sort of giving off when we are engaged in interacting with them. And then that's important for relationship management, because the more that you understand what is happening socially in a relationship, the more you're going to be prepared to manage that relationship. And there are a lot of relationships in medicine that we talk about. And that is why this is so important, because relationships really form a key factor in the practice of medicine, research, teaching, service activities, all of those things, right?
Absolutely. I think knowledge and relationships are the currency of our economy today when I think about success in the workplace, because we are relying now so heavily on technology. We could go down the path of talking about AI sometime. And when I think about those technological pieces that help inform decisions, then what's the differentiator? If everyone has access to the same technology, then the differentiator becomes how someone feels that you've treated them, right? When you're interacting with them in a social or professional setting. So I think that the ability to serve the people around you effectively through relationships is a really striking competitive edge. And if I think about a business setting, so I'm going to challenge you with a question. If we thought of everyone who a medical professional interacts with as a customer, who are your customers?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, in pediatrics, our customers the first thing that would come to mind is, of course, the kids that we treat, the parents of the kids that we treat. But I think also in medicine, our customers in that sense are also the people that we work with, because we want folks to enjoy their job, to feel satisfied and fulfilled in their work, to feel like they're making a difference. And so in that sense, in order to sort of keep those folks functioning at the highest capacity, we really need to think about their emotions, our emotions, and how we engage with one another.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I recently visited a new primary care physician who holds the same board certifications as many, many, many others. And I walked away from that appointment feeling so good about that relationship. And as I reflected upon it, it wasn't because of the medical discussion that we had. It was because of her EQ. She took a genuine interest in listening. And she had a very high level of self-awareness when she asked questions. So we see that, and I'm trained to look for that. But that was the differentiator in that appointment. She could have given me the exact same advice as any other physician, but she made me feel very heard, and her EQ was very high.
Yeah. And to that point, there is research out there that shows that folks with the highest levels of IQ outperform those with average IQ about 20% of the time. And when we say outperform, I just mean in terms of success at their work, satisfaction, not only their own satisfaction, but the satisfaction of their customers, all those kind of things. So having a high IQ can sort of boost your performance about 20% of the time. However, people who have average IQ outperform those with high IQ 70% of the time. And that difference really is EQ. So you can have an average IQ, but if your EQ is high, that's going to make all the difference.
Oh, well, absolutely. Absolutely. People remember how you make them feel, not the report you give them, not looking at their medical records. People remember how you make them feel. And that is huge, not only in a clinical setting, and I think we'll talk about this maybe, but in a teaching setting as well. As you are teaching new and young, early career medical professionals, teaching them that that's just as important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think that happens as much as it should. And the reason is, as I encounter my colleagues and learners, I mention EQ often. And a lot of times there are people who sort of have heard of it, but they don't really know the ins and outs of it. They don't know what those 4 pillars are that we've talked about. And so you can tell that in their medical training, this is not really something that has been brought up. And yet there is evidence to suggest that EQ improves communication and teamwork, our ability to respond well under pressure, empathy, the quality of care that we give, and career satisfaction. And because this is a continuing medical education podcast, and just so you don't think that I'm making all of that up, there is good evidence to support all of these things I just mentioned. And I'm going to put a couple links in the show notes. One is to an article called A Systematic Review of Physician Leadership and Emotional Intelligence. That's from the Journal of Graduate Medical Education. And there's another one from the McGill Journal of Medicine called Emotional Intelligence, Use in Medical Education and Practice. And so I'll put links to both of those in the show notes so you can take a little closer look if you want at what the evidence is of how emotional intelligence is so important and intersects with multiple areas within medicine. Now, today we are going to really concentrate on that self-awareness piece. And we've kind of mentioned what self-awareness is. Just why don't you state it again, Erica? What is the self-awareness piece of emotional intelligence? Because I feel that really is foundational to the whole thing.
It really is. It's the recognizing your feelings and emotions in the moment. I'd say it's processing kind of what is driving those feelings and emotions. You know, it could be situational. It could be something that's out of your control or your purview. But having the awareness and recognizing how you're feeling in that moment is a huge part of self-awareness. And I would say another part of that is actually understanding that your behaviors create impressions and impact on others. So that dives a little bit into self-management, but I think it is a key piece of self-awareness. I like to say that we all lead from where we stand, and someone is watching all the time, whether it's a patient, whether it's a colleague or a nurse, whether it's a family. Somebody's always watching your behavior. Maybe it's a student or a resident, and oftentimes, if that behavior is repeated, it gets mirrored back. So we have to have a really keen awareness of how our behaviors create impressions. And I think that's a big piece of self-awareness as well. Yeah.
And that then leads to, if we have self-awareness, then we can better manage our actions, our words that we speak to people. We also have more, as we are more aware of ourselves, we start to become more aware of where other people are in terms of their emotions. And then we have an improved capacity to manage relationships when we better understand what we're feeling and what others are feeling in this relationship, correct?
I think another piece of self-awareness that often gets shortchanged is the ability to understand your own personal beliefs and your belief system. Not a lot of people sit down and actually intentionally think about what it is that they believe. But what happens is if I believe something is good or bad, my reaction to that then goes in a positive or negative direction, emotionally and my behaviors. So wrapping your mind around your belief system, what are your core values, can be a big piece of self-awareness as well. But it does take a little bit of work to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it all starts with self-awareness. And I thought that the remainder of this show, I thought it would be helpful to actually think of some very practical situations that many pediatric and medical professionals find themselves in on an almost daily basis in the realms of clinical medicine, research, and teaching, also service activities. Those are the 4 pillars of academic medicine, all very important. And I just wanted to go through some very real examples of relationship dynamics that often can lead to conflict. But of course, we want to try to turn what could be a negative experience into a positive experience by having that self-awareness piece. And then in future episodes, we're going to carry that on with these examples to talk about then self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. But right now, just focusing on the self-awareness piece. And I came up with some scenarios that I think are pretty common, just to kind of run through this in a very practical way and what this looks like. And so the first place I wanted to start really was clinical practice. And one thing I think that can cause an emotional response in medical professionals are folks who don't show up for their appointment, or maybe they do show up, but they're like 20 minutes late. And so that is something that we hear a lot about as we're practicing, that we complain. We hear our staff complaining that, oh, so-and-so is late, or they're probably going to be late again. And so just sort of at the base level, how do you think that would make most of us feel?
Well, I think every professional likes a little bit of control over their day, right? And that is something that is perhaps out of our control. So that could lead to feelings of lack of control. It could lead to feelings, right? Without the whole story, we write the narrative ourselves. And so do these patients not care? Do they not respect me as their clinician? So it could lead to all kinds of different things. Is it fair to the other patients who are here on time and now they might have to wait longer? Did that cut into my lunch? Do I have to stay later now to serve, this patient? So it could lead to all kinds of stories that may or may not be true.
Yeah. And, one example I like to give when folks are complaining about that is we don't know, maybe the patient, that family relies on public transportation. Maybe there are other things in their life that prevent them from being able to be on time. And if we, in a very nice, non-judgmental way, help them through that, that can help with relationship management, which I know I'm getting ahead of myself. But I think too, when we do kind of think a couple steps ahead, it does help with our own self-awareness of our emotions, because we can start to sort of calm down a little bit when we understand what other factors might be involved. And of course, we're not going to catch that unless we do have social awareness for what that family might be feeling. I mean, they may feel very embarrassed that they're late all the time, or they may not like the fact that they aren't able to show up because there isn't transportation, or there's some, maybe the mom's a single mom and she's been threatened at work that if she misses another day that she's going to get fired. There's so many complicated things that could do this. And if we're just focused on, I don't feel appreciated, then that's maybe why they didn't come, or I wouldn't run late if I were in that situation, or that fairness piece that you mentioned, that others may have to wait longer because someone is late. I mean, those are all things that can make us feel emotional. But once we get all of the data, and so we're not just making up our own narrative that this person doesn't respect me and that's why they are always late. But as we get more of that data, then it no longer is a narrative. We get more to the truth and can actually help in ways that we might not have been able to help if we just left it as, well, I feel disrespected. All right, let's move on to another scenario that often happens in medical practice, and that is when patients or parents, in the case of pediatrics, might disagree with our advice. Vaccines come to mind. There are a lot of preventative type things that we recommend, whether it be routine childhood immunizations or HPV vaccines, COVID vaccines. A lot of times parents or patients disagree with what we think about, and that can certainly bring up a lot of strong emotions, right?
Well, I would think the immediate and obvious emotions that would come up are, thoughts that, well, I want the best care for this child, for this patient. And so why would you disagree with that? I want the best care for this person. Or, this is based in science. This is based in evidence. My recommendations are solid. So why would you disagree with me? So those, to me, are two immediate things, thoughts that would jump out on an emotional level, and how that could spiral into other thoughts. What are some other things that someone might think? What, in your experience, what have you thought before?
Yeah, no, I think you make a really good point that I went to medical school. I went to undergrad for 4 years. I went to medical school for 4 years. I did a residency for 3 years. Maybe I did a fellowship after that. And I have all of this training. I had to pass 3 sets of national medical boards and then 1 specialty board. If I did a fellowship, a subspecialty board. Like, there's a lot of education and testing, and evidence-based answers to questions are really important, because at the heart of it, physicians are scientists and teachers. And so we want to use the evidence to think about what's best for the health of a child. And we really, in our heart, feel there's evidence to suggest that, benefits outweigh risks for particular things. And so then when parents, Google something and have a different opinion, based on a blog post that they read, that can make us feel undervalued and make us feel prideful, make us feel argumentative, make us feel like we should be able to convince them to change their mind. And if we can't, then there's something either wrong with the way that I present things, or there's something wrong with them, that they don't understand what I'm saying. And so all of those emotions, and a lot of them, when you think about it, it's pride, not feeling valued, feeling like I don't really have control over what's best for this child's health. And if I get caught up in all of that, then I'm not going to effectively be able to help navigate parents through making those kind of tough decisions. And I think for that one, as we kind of look ahead and jump ahead a little, we have to understand that these parents who don't agree with us also have their child's best interest in mind. They aren't saying, I don't want that vaccine, just to be argumentative. I mean, they really think that there could be harm. They think maybe the risk outweighs the benefit. And I think when we have empathy, because we understand what they are feeling emotionally, then that can help sort of temper our own emotions that we're feeling. So I know we're focused on self-awareness here, but when we think about mitigating those strong emotions, we do have to have some social awareness of what the parent might be thinking and why they might be upset. I mean, they may have a nephew that they know who had a vaccine and a month later was diagnosed with autism. And even though it wasn't causative, the fact that it was associated in time really affects them emotionally. And we have to understand all of that as we engage with people.
Absolutely. The delivery of the content, the delivery of the conversation is where the intentional practice of self-awareness comes in. So if you are convincing these parents that ultimately you want to convince them to for their child to receive this vaccine, the way you deliver that message and make it impactful for them and come at them with, like you said, empathy, understanding, education, that's the next level in EQ, and using it to foster relationships. And so if you came at those same parents with an approach that was very clinical, very cold, this is what you need to do, it might not get the same response. It might not get the response that you want it to get. So that how you make people feel and the awareness of that, again, we go back to that, just is so important in so many scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. I recently had someone who did not want a flu vaccine. And they said, every time I get the flu vaccine, I get the flu. And the vaccine makes me sick. And so then just, you could immediately think, well, that's ridiculous. It's not a live viral vaccine. It's not going to make you sick. It can't make you sick. But then as you start to think about it more and a little more deeply, the immune system does cause you to have a fever, and it causes you to feel achy and maybe have a headache. And when we're sick and we feel those things, it's not necessarily the virus or the bacteria that's causing us to feel that way. It's our immune system. And so then understanding why they are thinking that, and then having the opportunity to explain how the immune system works, and that you're only going to have those symptoms for a day or two. Whereas if you really get the flu, you may have them for a solid week, might end up in the hospital, might get pneumonia. People can die from the flu. So, understanding where their fear is coming from can help. But we have to have our own self-awareness that as we start to feel emotional about the fact that they don't want a flu vaccine, it's not personal. Like, think about it from their point of view, and that's where empathy comes from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, all very important.
And what a timely topic this time of year, as many people in my life are getting their flu shots right now.
Yeah, and probably many are not.
Also correct.
And because they have fear of what it does and need education and empathy rather than someone coming at them like, well, don't you know this is best for you?
That's right.
Yeah. Another scenario in clinical practice that I wanted to mention that is often comes up, and that is conflict among clinical staff. So it might just be conflict with a colleague. Maybe we have differences of opinions. So it's not only the patient-doctor relationship in the office, there's also relationships between physicians themselves, between physicians and nurse practitioners or physician assistants. It may be between a nurse and another nurse, or a nurse and a receptionist. There's a lot of conflict that can happen in a medical office. How does that affect our self-awareness?
Well, conflict resolution is a skill that people often don't think about until it's intense enough that you need to figure out how to solve the conflict, right? It's one of those things where we don't think about it until things are bad. And in the workplace especially, we spend so much of our lives in the workplace that it really should be a little more harmonious than it is in any industry, quite frankly. And a lot of that is just due to human nature and a thousand personalities in the room. But when you layer on top of that self-awareness and EQ and thinking about staying focused in the present during that, maybe we've had a conflict with a colleague in the past, and we have to let that go and be focused on the present, or else those relationships can get broken. Choosing your arguments. Is it really important for you to be right in this instance? Obviously, when you're dealing with medical issues, yeah, you probably should be right. But when we're in the office, and what is the need to be correct? Forgiveness. Someone made a mistake. I don't think anyone would intentionally, gosh, I hope not, make a mistake in that setting. But sometimes it happens. And so thinking about forgiveness and really just at the end of that, ending conflicts that can't be resolved. Sometimes two people won't do things the same way, even though they'll get to the same result. And as long as that's okay, why do we need to be right all the time?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you do have a conflict with another person in the workplace, it's always a good idea, I feel, to, again, try to figure it out from their perspective. Like, explain to me why you feel this way or why you think we should do it this way. And then when I hear that explanation, that can help me with my own self-awareness, because at first I might be like, well, of course, my way is the best way. Why can't you understand that? But then when I take that next step of trying to understand how the other person feels, they make a very good case for what they want to do or what they feel needs to change. And then we have to be open up. Now, we have our own reasons for thinking the way that we do. And so we may, explain our case. And then hopefully if both parties try to understand each other, you can at least come to a middle road, because ultimately our staff, again, like you say, hopefully want there to be success, want us to be able to take care of patients well. And sometimes that just takes talking it out.
It absolutely does. And what happens when you create a culture where it's safe to talk those things out, you're creating a culture of trust. You're creating a culture of psychological safety in the workplace, which is something that we're really talking about a lot today. And what that does, though, it fosters this culture of accountability. And I would then feel safe coming to you and saying, Dr. Patrick, something is wrong, or I've made a mistake, and not fearing the results and the ramifications from you in a way that is outside of the scope of what should be normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, you have to recognize whatever it is that we're talking about, because there's so many different conflicts that could arise. But just as an example, if a receptionist wanted to do things in a different order, or thought it was more important to get this information at this time, or whatever it is, but I think it ought to be a different way. But then understanding, as you said, there's more than one way to get to the same result. And that's true in medicine too. There are a lot of examples I could give where one physician may treat something one way, another physician may treat it a completely different way. Both feel that their way is evidence-based, and both ways get to a similar outcome, even though we've done it differently. We see that all the time. And so in the office, the same thing can be said about what order a receptionist does things in. And if it makes her job or his job easier, and it makes sense to them, and they're going to feel ownership in making the practice better, even though I may disagree with that's the better way. But as long as it's not harming the office and it's giving that person more career satisfaction and more control over their job, those are all important things too, right?
Oh, they are. They are. We see right now there's an incredible amount of attrition in the workplace because of reasons that you were describing, because people don't feel psychologically safe. The lower on the list for reasons that people leave a job is salary. Higher on that list are relationships, how they feel when they're at work. Do they feel valued? Do they feel heard? What's their relationship like with their manager or leader? Those are really important and impactful things. And in an organization where there's a high level of turnover, those are things we really need to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And this really does go back to self-awareness, because when there's not psychological safety, it's usually because of interactions in relationships. And so the bad interactions that folks are having so that they don't feel psychologically safe come down to that other person's self-awareness. They probably don't even recognize that they're creating a culture that doesn't feel psychologically safe, because they're not aware of how their emotions are impacting their actions and their words.
No, that's exactly right. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you think about, I'm a person who might have a lower EQ, and I want things a very certain way in my office. And now it's breeding a staff and a set of colleagues who aren't being transparent with me because they're afraid of my reactions and emotions. So rather than having a well-oiled machine of an office, I say office, could be an ER, could be any number of industries. Instead of having this high-functioning place of work, now we have folks who might not tell you that something is wrong, that might be making decisions based on fear. And that's the last thing I would imagine in a medical setting that you would want.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's transition to teaching, which is another very important part of the medical profession, as we have those who are training and learning to do what we do, and we are wanting to impart nuggets of knowledge, which should not only be clinical knowledge, but also knowledge on EQ. I mean, I think this is really an important thing to teach those who are rising up in the medical profession. But there are situations that do cause emotional reactions within healthcare that are related to teaching. And one of those is time constraints in the clinical environment. So, and what I mean by that is as healthcare as a business, particularly here in the United States, becomes more of an important thing. There are decisions that get made based on income, because we have to have income in order to pay workers, in order to pay the electric bill and have the building and all of those things. And so there is pressure to see more people in shorter amounts of time from a financial stability model. But that directly impacts teaching. Because if I'm in a busy practice and I have a learner, now I'm seeing more patients, I have less time to teach, and that can bring up some intense emotional feelings in people who are trying to teach learners, right?
Absolutely. And it can not only evoke strong emotions in the teachers and the professors, but think about the emotions of the learners, feeling perhaps shortchanged, feeling that the person they're looking to get this education is perhaps coming across a little curt with them, when really it has nothing to do with the learner at all. It's these other external factors that are creating this sense of urgency, and that has to be frustrating for both sides of that relationship.
Yeah. And there probably then is a middle ground that you could try to find, because this is not only an issue with the teacher and the student and that relationship, but it also is impacted by the relationship that the teacher has with the administrators, who are saying we need to see more people because we have to pay the bills. And but having empathy for each other can be very helpful when the administrators recognize that, hey, this person also needs to teach. But when the physician also recognizes from the administrator's point of view, we have to keep this place open so that more people can come and get great care. And so I think too, when we understand it from each other's point of view, we're more likely to come to some sort of middle ground. And then we can get creative in terms of how we proceed with teaching. And just to give a little, again, I've been sort of jumping ahead a little bit each time, having that self-awareness that our lens is not the only lens, and understanding that seeing more people is also important, then how can I make the most of the time that I do have? And so that's where the idea of micro teaching comes, where we meet with our learners before we start. We find out, who they are, what their experience is, what it is that they want to learn that day, and then finding little moments to teach them what they need to learn. One nugget per patient, or there's a lot of different ways, and we'll talk more about that in future episodes when we really get into relationship management. But just again, having that self-awareness piece, that it's not just all about me. There's other lenses that we have to look at with the administration, with the students, and figure out the best way to do this, because otherwise we're going to be very frustrated all the time.
Right. And I love that you talked about, you called it micro teaching. So micro learning is just kind of the business side of that. And when we think about adult learners, that's actually the way that we learn the best. And we actually absorb the most information in tiny little nuggets. So I love to hear that is a strategy when thinking about clinical education, because we can't absorb sitting down and listening to 2 hours of something. But if you reinforce an idea several times throughout the day in tiny chunks, we've got it now. It's gelled. And that's a great technique. And so when I think about some of those scenarios you were sharing with time constraints, and thinking about how can I take an idea today and reinforce it several times throughout the day, that's one of the ways to be intentional about getting in front of what could be an emotionally charged, I don't have time for that. We don't have time for those questions. You can get in front of it by having a plan. We just have to be intentional about it.
Yeah, absolutely. The next one I thought about that's pretty common really is very similar to conflict among staff that we just talked about in an office. And that is when you have a learner who may not be interested or engaged. And that can evoke feelings within us. For instance, maybe it's a student who from our point of view, well, they just want to go into surgery. And here they are in pediatrics and they're not engaged. They don't care about our profession. And so that can bring up feelings. Or it may be just someone who you've maybe given an assignment and they haven't done it. And so that, again, that can create an emotional response, which then if we aren't aware of our response and or our emotions and where they're coming from, our response can actually make that situation worse rather than trying to help. And so again, this is where self-awareness is so important in relationships. And if we have students who don't seem engaged, we need to get to the bottom of where that's coming from.
And if you're an educator who perhaps has 20, 25, 30 years on the learner that you're working with, I think that there might be, I'm making an assumption, there might be a sense of, I wouldn't have acted like that when I was a resident, right? Or when I was learning. And it kind of turns into this, well, that's not how I behave. And you get this sort of yucky feeling towards that learner without thinking about that empathy spin and without thinking about maybe there's something else going on and engaging them to pull them back in. And I think as an educator, that's one of our responsibilities is when we have someone, there's a reason that they're with us. Maybe you don't know that reason, but maybe you do. And there's a reason that they're spending time with us. And I think it's part of our responsibility to make sure that the education is meeting them where they are and that we keep them engaged, which can be tough sometimes.
It really can. And I think one way that we can get more empathy from where learners are today compared to 30 years ago. 30 years ago, and I was a learner 30 years ago, you could sit through an hour lecture and that was just normal. And you could do it, you could take notes, and society and all of the things in our lives have changed to such micro moments in our life that it becomes more difficult to sit through a lecture than it was 30 years ago. I feel like today, with watching people watch YouTube videos that are, 10, 15 minutes long, and then they move on. Or if it's longer than that, they watch 10 minutes of it. And now I'm bored with that and I have to move on to something else. So I almost feel like our brains have changed as technology changes. And so those learners are not in the same spot that we were 30 years ago. And so when we say, well, I wouldn't have done that. Yeah, but you wouldn't have done it, but you also aren't exposed to all of the things, or you weren't exposed to all of the things in short bursts that folks are exposed to now. And even in our adult life, 30 years later, I now do have difficulty sitting through an hour lecture. I just went to the American Academy of Pediatrics National Conference, and it was actually lectures that I designed and recruited folks to give these talks, and they were great talks. But, by the end of 3 hours of lectures, like I couldn't do anymore. It's really changed.
Oh, it absolutely has changed. And I think that there's so much content and there's just so much in learning medicine that it's definitely is a challenge to utilize microlearning and learning bursts and things like that. But I think about how I get my news. My news is through headlines as I'm scrolling on my phone, having my morning coffee. It's not sitting down and watching an hour-long news program. It's what are my learning bursts? And by the way, technology is learning what I want to see. So now I'm not learning about anything other than things that I'm clicking on. So it has changed the landscape of how adults learn. So if that's the way we learn at home and outside of the workplace, how can we take those strategies and build them in and bake them into our curriculum in the workplace, in the classroom? Because that now will get the most bang for its buck.
Yeah, which then that rolls back around. So this really starts with self-awareness. I can be upset that a learner doesn't seem to be engaged. That's just the surface. When I really start digging deeper, it's that I feel that way because I feel like I would have done a better job, or it wouldn't have been that way for me. But then when I think about all of that what we just talked about, that it really is a different learning environment, that I'm comparing apples to oranges. That is the process of self-awareness, isn't it?
It is. It is. Have I thought about how I'm delivering this content to these learners? Right? That's part of that is self-awareness, thinking about the way that we engage with technology and media today and using that to deliver content in a way that's impactful and memorable to I'm sorry, but younger students.
Yeah. And then what happens as we take this full circle is that micro teaching may actually, which we've been forced to do because we have to see more patients in a shorter amount of time, may actually be beneficial. And so we can complain about not having the opportunity to lecture for an hour, but actually what we have to compromise in is actually better in today's environment.
It is. It is. You're making a case for my work. Yeah. Keep going, Dr. Patrick.
All right, let's move on. Another thing in teaching is, again, this comes down to time, and that is planning and executing lectures and workshops. And what I meant by that is just that there may be times in an academic career when we're asked, often, in fact, to give talks, and we can sometimes feel like, well, I have all of these things on my plate, and I don't have time for this. And then that sort of gets us feeling strong feelings of emotions. But I think what we've talked about here is if we kind of turn things around a little bit, we don't have to put together big, long talks. Like we can, refashion the way that we teach to get more bang for the buck, to make it more interactive, to make people have active learning and thinking during the process. And then we can actually have fun with that because we can get creative in terms of how we deliver content. So instead of being upset that I have to do this, having that self-awareness of why do I feel upset at this? Because I'm creating something that people are going to fall asleep, while I'm giving it. But if I kind of change my thinking and get more creative with it, it can actually be a fun exercise.
Oh, it absolutely could be fun. But I would also add to that, there's a technique in manufacturing called 5 whys and a how, where you keep asking a question, why did this happen? And it leads to the next question, why did this happen? And how do you get to a result to change the outcome? And when I think about that particular scenario and I think about self-awareness, if I'm upset that I don't have time for this, why? Is it because I mismanage my time? I could absolutely have enough time for this, but I'm not very good at prioritization. I'm not very good at time. Maybe there's something situational. My daughter's getting married next month. There's all these things that have to happen. So going through that exercise, what a great self-awareness exercise. Thinking about, well, why do I feel that way? Because of these things, X, Y, and Z. Well, why do I right now feel like I am not good at managing my time? Well, there's these other things that are happening. Well, how could I make that better? That's a great self-awareness exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to move on to medical research. And honestly, as we think about these scenarios, there's a lot of what we have already said that plays into these. But I just wanted to give some examples that I think will resonate with medical researchers out there. Again, a lot of it is conflict among team members. So you may have a disagreement among team members at a particular research site, or if there's multiple sites involved, there might be tension among the clinical sites. And a lot of times that does come down to the same sort of things we've been talking about, where if we have a conflict with another researcher, maybe it's, whose name gets second or third, what order the names are in the publication can be important. Maybe it is, the IRB had a recommendation for how to do something, and maybe there's differences of opinion. So there's a lot of potential for conflict within a research team. But there's also can be conflict between multiple sites where one site maybe started a project and other sites were recruited. And so they feel like they're in charge, but maybe someone else feels like they have a better idea. And a lot of all of these kind of conflicts that can happen within research teams it's very similar to disinterested students or conflicts among staff in an office. And really, I think having empathy for each other's position and then hopefully coming to some sort of middle ground oftentimes is the answer.
It absolutely is the answer oftentimes. And I like to take, when I'm working with teams that have to produce something, have to produce a product or a project, we go backwards. We have the team assembled, but we start backwards. What is our ultimate goal? When I'm working in a consultative role with a team, we always talk about what are the outcomes you expect? What is the goal of this? How we get there, is that really the most relevant part of it? Or is the goal the most relevant part? And now we can work a little more harmoniously because we all have the same exact goal. We all expect the same outcome. And so I think in a research setting, working backwards could be invaluable.
Yeah. And just making sure that amongst your team and amongst sites that we all do have the same goal. And, folks are going to have different opinions, but we just need to sort of, as we explain our opinion, also understand where someone else's opinion is coming from and being open to the fact that the way we're looking at it may not be the right way or may not be the best way given that set of circumstances, or it might be, and we just have to do a better job of explaining why it's the better way and hope that the others have empathy for our position, which we're not guaranteed. But that's, all part of having relationships with other people, regardless of whether it's in our personal lives, in medical practice, or in medical research, or in teaching, all these things. Yeah. One other one I think about in academic medicine is promotion and tenure. It is very spelled out exactly what you need to do. And sometimes we think like, we're the exception and we can figure out whatever it is, our niche in medicine, we can kind of explain that. And maybe it falls flat. And so that can create frustration and you may feel like you're not valued or that the work that you do is not as important because you're not meeting the criteria for promotion. But then when we think about fairness and what other folks have to do to get promoted, we still have to follow the steps that are in place to get that done. And I think, again, having self-awareness of why do I feel upset that I'm not getting promoted, and then figuring out, well, what do we need to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think one of the biggest pieces in this area around self-awareness and how this can sabotage that is the feelings of inequity and fairness. I'm going to go back to that for just a second. And comparing ourselves with others is very dangerous in the workplace, especially when it comes to promotion and tenure. There are a number of reasons why your colleague John over here might have been promoted before you have, even if you have similar CVs and similar work products and such. So the self-awareness piece is key to stopping comparing ourselves with others. That can be a career inhibitor rather than career growth and personal and professional development growth. Looking up how much somebody makes, they make more than I do. Having a different title and I deserved that more. And really being thoughtful about why you feel that way. Big piece of self-awareness, especially in a professional setting.
Yeah. And I think that's where mentorship can really be important because whoever your mentor is, if you don't have one, it's important to find one. They have probably been through all of those feelings themselves, and they probably had difficulty. They probably felt feelings of inequity, and it was their fairness. And so by having a relationship with a mentor who can kind of walk you through what they went through can be very helpful and help with self-awareness. Mentors
and coaches, I think, are just critical to success, especially as our professional careers grow and over time. Looking for success in any industry, it's nice to know that someone else has gone through what you've gone through and hear, well, how did you deal with this? it's not someone prescribing to you how to feel or what to do in any particular situation. But gosh, we love to know that other people have shared our experience, and that can be really impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. The final area that I wanted to very briefly talk about, because a lot of these things, again, come back down to really just thinking deeply about why we're feeling the way that we feel, and what sort of things are underneath the surface, which takes some introspection. But with regard to service activities, all of us, especially in academic medicine, are expected, and even if you're in private practice and mostly just do clinical practice, there's probably different jobs within your practice, such as, you might be the person in charge of making sure the office is ready for an emergency, or, really being the key person for informatics and your electronic medical record in the office. So we all have things that we do aside from teaching, practicing, and research that really involve service. And one of the things I think that can come up is feeling like you're being asked to do too much, and that's impacting your work-life harmony. And I love, someone told me once, because it used to, we would say work-life balance, but oftentimes our work and our personal life are not balanced. There's an ebb and flow. And so sometimes our work life is really busy, and sometimes it's not. And we can take advantage of that and have way more the life part at home. And so it really is more of a harmony than a balance. But as we work at having work-life harmony, what ways can we practice self-management to help us when we're feeling a little stressed about all the things we have to do at work?
Well, I'll give a controversial answer to that. And this is a personal belief. But when I think about work-life harmony, which I love using that word instead, I think about there's sort of an archaic thought that there's a work Erica, and then there's Erica at home. And those are two different people, right? I change and assimilate to my workplace based upon external factors. And when I'm at home, I proverbially put on my emotional sweatpants and I'm a different person at home, right? That's not how we are, I don't believe, as humans. We have one brain and we have one heart. And I think that there's a lot of authenticity and genuineness when I see someone in a professional setting behaving the same way that they would at home. Would I deliver this message to these patients if I knew them personally in the same way that I would to a stranger? And so I think that goes a long way with establishing sort of our internal boundaries and guardrails around our behavior and self-awareness. Am I treating others the way that I would treat people that I know in my personal life? We have to stop and think about that. So there aren't two Ericas anymore. There's only one. And so people, as they get to know me in the workplace, they would expect a very similar me outside of it as well.
Yeah. And I can think when people do not feel safe from a psychological perspective in the workplace, they probably are encountering people who are behaving in a way that they would not behave with their families. And so, most families like psychological safety. You love one another, you're supporting one another, you're there for each other. And if we're the same person at home that we are at work, we should be extending gratitude for the folks that we work with. We should give them the benefit of the doubt. We should try to understand and have empathy for their position and where they're coming from. And all of that is as we recognize that we are one person and we need to treat folks at work the same as we treat folks at home. That really does play into self-awareness if you've not thought about it that way before.
It absolutely does. And we'll talk about this more in the future as we get into relationship management. But I think that there will be an intersect in the Venn diagram of all of these four quadrants that really sort of put this picture together.
Yeah.
But it all starts with the awareness of how you behave and your own emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take a step back. We've talked through examples in clinical practice, in teaching, in research, and in service activities. And I think we've done a pretty good job of explaining why self-awareness is important in all of these different aspects of medicine. So I think the next question really, and really the final question, is what strategies can help us improve our self-awareness?
I think I've used the word intentional quite a bit during our conversation today. But there is a practice to that. And the practice doesn't often happen when I've had a 12-hour shift and I've gotten home and I've gotten something to eat and maybe decompressed for a while with my family. And oh yeah, there was a situation earlier today. I want to reflect on it. That is not intentional. Sometimes intent has to be in the moment, and as fast-paced as some offices are today, that's really difficult to do. So we have to carve out time to practice. The practice of emotional intelligence, you get better the more you do it, just like the practice of medicine. And so as I think about pausing and reflecting during a situation, maybe I've gotten upset with someone in the office because they've made a mistake, and maybe I raised my voice in the moment. That doesn't create a great place of safety for that person to come to you with problems in the future. So stopping, reflecting, why did I raise my voice? What were some of the other factors, internal and external? And around relationship management, is this something I can in the moment go back and say, hey, that was not behavior that was acceptable. Can we talk through what just happened? Sometimes we don't have time to do that. We're so fast-paced anymore, but pausing and reflecting, a great strategy to help improve that. But there's some other tools as well that we can use. Obviously, we can learn a little bit more about ourselves by doing things like reading and research. But if you are, again, a leader in any profession, there are tools like a 360 where you can get feedback from your colleagues, your leaders, those who might report to you, your students, and ask them for open and honest feedback. If you don't have time to do a full 360 evaluation, ask people. It really is that easy. Hey, this is the first shift that we've spent together, colleague. Can you give me some feedback? People get caught off guard. That is not something that we often do. But wow, how impactful if someone said, well, I really liked working with you during this shift, but there were a couple things that made me pause and question. Can we talk about those? Wow. I mean, that's real-time feedback that can give you a glimpse into how those around you perceive you. And then you can take action on that feedback.
Yeah. They're really important things to do. And we mentioned that EQ is dynamic. It can improve. We want it to improve. And so in order for it to improve, we have to really be reflective and practice it and think about it and make it a topic of conversation that is just normal in the workplace. And I think that's one of the things we're trying to do here with our series on emotional intelligence and medicine is to really make this something that people start thinking about because it improves, communication and teamwork and career satisfaction and all the things. And so it really is important. And we really appreciate you stopping by and talking about self-awareness. We're going to have lots of links in the show notes for you. I mentioned a couple of those. One is going to be that Introduction to EQ, Emotional Intelligence in Medicine, episode 74, which really is just sort of a broad overview of emotional intelligence, whereas today we really took a deep dive on self-awareness. Also, those journal articles, a systemic review of physician leadership and emotional intelligence, also emotional intelligence use in medical education and practice. If you've not heard of a 360-degree feedback, we have some information on that for you in the show notes. And there's also an interesting article from Harvard Medical School called Emotional Intelligence for Physician Leaders. I thought that was really interesting. And of course, there are some books that are helpful too that we talked about in our last episode, Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ, and Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And we'll have links to both of those books as well. So lots of resources if you'd like to take an even deeper dive into self-awareness. And then next time that we meet, which will probably be sometime in early 2024, we're going to do an episode on self-management. And so we'll just take it to that next step and think through some more examples, just like we did today. So once again, Ms. Erica Banta, Director of Digital Learning Solutions at The Ohio State University, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you as well.
We are back with just enough time to say thanks once again to all of you for taking time out of your day and making PediaCast CME a part of it. Really do appreciate that. Also, thanks again to our guest this week, Erica Banta, Director of Digital Learning Solutions at The Ohio State University. Don't forget, you can find us wherever podcasts are found. We're in the Apple and Google podcast apps, iHeartRadio, Spotify, SoundCloud, Amazon Music, and most other podcast apps for iOS and Android. Our landing site is PediaCastCME.org. You'll find our entire archive of past programs there, along with show notes for each of the episodes, our CME information, the terms of use agreement, and that handy contact page if you would like to suggest a future topic for the program. Reviews are helpful wherever you get your podcasts. We always appreciate when you share your thoughts about the show. And we love connecting with you on social media. You'll find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and LinkedIn. Simply search for PediaCast. So you've listened to the podcast. Now be sure to claim your free Category 1 continuing medical education credit. It's an easy thing to do. Simply head over to the show notes for this episode at PediaCastCME.org. You'll find a link to the post test in the show notes. Follow that link to Cloud CME, take and pass the post test, and the Category 1 credit is yours. You do have to click the Materials tab at the top of that page to find the post test. Super easy, except for that one extra step. But again, we do offer credit to many pediatric professionals, including doctors, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, nurses, pharmacists, psychologists, social workers, and dentists. Of course, you want to be sure the content of the episode matches your scope of practice. And in this case today, it really matches everyone's scope of practice because EQ really is that important. Complete details on the CME is available at PediaCastCME.org. Also, don't forget about our podcast for parents. A lot of pediatricians and other healthcare providers also tune in to Plain PediaCast as we cover pediatric news, answer listener questions, and interview pediatric and parenting experts. Shows are available at the landing site for that program, PediaCast.org. Also available wherever podcasts are found. Simply search for PediaCast. Thanks again for stopping by, and until next time, this is Dr. Mike saying stay informed, keep it evidence-based, and take care of those kids. So long, everybody.
This program is a production of Nationwide Children's. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on PediaCast CME.